brief introduction here, and then we're going to head on to the pollinator basics. I'm going to go over monarch butterfly species outline, hit up some citizen science research and participation that I've been doing over the last couple of years. And then we're going to end the presentation with some tips that you could do for supporting pollinators. So I know Lynn just went over this, but just to kind of go through it again, that I am the current secretary and treasurer for the Midcoast Maine chapter. I'm doing this all remotely from Central Texas. I am from the Northeast, and hopefully in the next year I'll be able to come back. But currently I'm working as the monarch butterfly biologist on Fort Cavazos, which is in Central Texas. I have gotten my undergraduate degree at the University of Rhode Island in wildlife and conservation biology, and I am still a current student getting my graduate degree at the University of Illinois, and I hopefully will be graduating this May, so fingers crossed. It looks good. So just so that you're aware of kind of where I am and where I'm working. So I have a couple of maps here. On the left, we have just picture of Texas, where Fort Cavazos is located, the red star. It's about an hour and a half northwest of Austin. It's a very large Army military training facility. It's about 215,000 acres, and it's made up of 76 training areas. And so I am working with the Natural Resources Department, specifically the Adaptive and Integrated Management Program, or AIM for short. And so within our program, our main focus is the proactive management of mission-sensitive species. And these are species that, if they were listed as endangered, could potentially restrict and limit military training, which is a problem. We don't want that. And as Lynn mentioned, that I am actually a civilian. I am not active military. I am employed by the University of Illinois. And then the university has a special agreement with the U.S. Army and allows me to work there on the installation. So we're going to jump into a little bit about the pollination process, just kind of go over the basics a little bit. So when we think about the pollination process, and we're going to be using a bee or a wasp as an example, you can look at the image on the left here. A insect will go to a flower, and they're going to be searching for nectar to feed on. And as they're searching, they're going to be picking up pollen grains from the male parts of the plant. And then they will be traveling to another flower, the same species. As they're searching for that nectar, the pollen will drop into the female parts of the plant and then eventually turn into a seed. And so there are a couple different types of ways that seeds are dispersed in our environment. We have a few examples here that I'm going to go over. So I work with a lot of grassland habitats on the installation, and specifically with those blooming plant species, they're utilizing wind dispersal methods. And so if you think of dandelions or milkweed seeds, they have that little white tuft that's kind of like a parachute. So the seeds are able to be dispersed throughout the grasslands using the wind currents. However, in like water habitats, you might have seeds that have the ability to float to different areas of lakes, ponds, rivers. But there are some species where they have a seed pod, like a partridge pea in the top right here. And the seed pod, as it's maturing, it'll explode and disperse the seeds in all these different directions. And so it's really fun to actually watch, especially in slow motion. But animals are also really great at dispersing seeds. So a classic example would be squirrels. And so we know squirrels are collecting acorns and they're caching them for the cold months. And squirrels will not always remember where they're keeping the acorns. And so under the right growing conditions with nutrients and water and sunlight, the acorn will germinate into an oak tree. We do have some animals that are feeding on berries, and inside the tissue there are seeds, and these seeds do require going through the digestive process. They have a hard seed coat. So as the animal consumes the berry, digests the tissue around it, the seed will travel through the digestive tract, and then as it's flying around, or if it's a mammal walking around, it'll defecate the seed, and then it'll able to germinate from there. Last example, which is actually a picture I took a couple of years ago of my shoes. So we have some seeds that have sharp barbs. This is a species of grass. We call it speargrass. And as I'm walking through the grassland, I'm picking up all of these seeds that are attached to my clothing, my shoes. You could also find them on animals as well. They can stick burrs. A lot of burrs with hooks can stick to a lot of the fur that you see on mammals. And so as I'm walking several hundred meters through grasslands, I'm picking up these really sharp barbed seeds, and I get back to my field truck. And the first thing I do is I pick all of these seeds off and leave them at the spot. And so that's another great way for this plant to disperse seeds, is using humans or other mammals. So there are a lot of different types of pollinators. I have a few examples here, and I think usually we think of bees and butterflies, but moths are also a nocturnal pollinator, flies, beetles, and I know we don't really like them and they're very grumpy, but wasps are also an important pollinator as well. Hummingbirds. And then in South Texas, there are bat species that consume nectar, and they are pollinating tall cactus species. So if we're looking at flower shapes, we can kind of get a general sense of what type of pollinator is going to be using that flower. And I have a few examples here. A couple of them are Texas plants, but you do have trumpet vine up there in Maine. So if we start with the example on the left, we have lace cactus, and they have very large open flowers, bowl-shaped flowers. And this is great for beetles to get into. In the center trumpet vine, it has that trumpet shape or funnel shape, and we imagine a lot of hummingbirds using their very long bills to access nectar at the very back or back end of that plant. You may occasionally see a bumblebee or a bee try to get in there, and it's kind of funny to see them shimmy their way in there and shimmy back out. A lot of times I think most people think of hummingbirds with this plant. And then the last example, this is a cowpendaisy is the common name, and it is great for bees and butterflies. They have very small tubular shaped flowers that create this flat, wide landing platform, and bees and butterflies are able to use their tongues and their proboscis to go into each of the tiny little tubular flowers to get nectar. And it has this platform area, so it's open, they're able to land and access it. There are a couple examples of birds that you wouldn't typically think of. And so here are a couple photos from my own backyard of orchard orioles that are seeking out nectar from a native plant. The common name is Flamacanthus. And you can see that it has this small tubular shaped flower to it, kind of similar to trumpet vine. And they're using their bills to go in and seek out that nectar. And I believe orchard orioles, you may also see them up in the northern region, northeast region. They would probably be going after that trumpet vine. That's a really great example to use for your region. So let's jump into monarch butterflies. They're a very iconic migratory insect. You can find them globally, but the North American population is really well known for making that very long distance migration. The adults are this bright orange color, and they have black veins, and the borders of their wings have they're black borders with white spots, and their bodies are also black with white spots as well. And they have a set of antennae on their heads. The larvae or the caterpillars, they have stripes along their body, yellow, black, and white, and they have two sets of tentacles. So adult butterflies have antennae, caterpillars have tentacles, and you'll find them on their heads and on their rears. And so I have included a map from monarchwatch.org, and this map is showing the migration pathway. And so there's two populations of monarchs, the eastern population and the western population. And I'm working with the eastern population because that's what's funneling through my area. And so you can see the different pathways. In the spring, they're migrating up north to their summer breeding range, which is in the northern area of the country. They do also go up into Canada as well. And in the fall, they're going to come back down through Texas and funnel through Texas to go to the overwintering grounds in central Mexico. There is a non-migratory population in the southern tip of Florida, and they stay there year-round because it's super warm and they don't need to migrate. And then with the western population, from the information that I know, they're going to be overwintering along the coast of California in oak groves. And there is an organization around Thanksgiving that will go and have volunteers do a census. And it's really interesting to see that information. So I highly recommend looking into that, but I don't know too much about it. I did include a little icon to kind of show you where Fort Cavazos is and where I'm located based off of that migratory pathway. So the installation is definitely really important for not only the spring migration, but we are within that fall migratory pathway where it funnels through Texas. Okay, the life cycle. So female monarch butterflies are going to be seeking out milkweed plants to lay their eggs. They lay hundreds of eggs. And it takes about 3 to 5 days for that egg to hatch. And the first thing the caterpillar is going to do is consume the eggshell. From there, they're going to be consuming the leaves, flowers of milkweed plants. And they will go through 5 developmental stages or instars before they're ready to go into that pupa or chrysalis stage. And it can take anywhere from 11 to 18 days to go through the instar developmental stages. And when they're in the chrysalis stage, it could take anywhere from 8 to 14 days, and that's temperature dependent. So in warmer months or warmer times of the year, it's going to be more like a week. But if it's cooler, it could take up to 2 weeks. Now, I know a couple slides back, we talked about the migratory pathway, but a lot of people don't realize that it takes several generations for the monarchs to actually make it up to that northern area of their summer breeding range. And so the overwintering population in the spring, they're going to start migrating through Texas. They're going to mate, lay eggs, and they will die. And the offspring that have hatched from the eggs will be considered the first generation of the year. And so their goal is to go through the life cycle. Then they're going to start migrating north again, breed, lay eggs, they will die. And this happens 3 to 4 times as they're migrating up north. And that 4th generation, towards the end of the summer, beginning of the fall, they're going to start getting environmental cues that it's time for them to start migrating southbound back to Mexico. And that could be the flowers aren't blooming anymore. There isn't any food available for them. The days are getting shorter. It's getting colder. So they're going to start migrating back down. And that's the group of individuals that are going to be doing these long migratory, that long migration. And so it's really cool to sit and think about that. The individuals that we're seeing in the fall are the great grandchildren of the individuals that we saw in the spring. And I think I've always thought that was really cool. So why are monarch butterflies important? Monarchs are considered a flagship species for grassland and pollinator conservation. And that means that they are a species that are becoming really well known and very likable. So when people think of animals that they like, a lot of people say polar bears, tigers, whales, pandas, elephants. And so monarch butterflies are starting to become one of those species that are very well known and very iconic. And so a lot of people have this personal connection and this bond that they're developing with them. I've had quite a few people talk to me about experiences they had as children growing up in school, and their teachers brought in monarch caterpillars and they looked and they fed them and watched the metamorphosis process. And it just really stuck with them as they grow up, and they, brought their children into it and showed them the process. But also there's a cultural and spiritual aspect with them as well, especially in Mexico during the southward migration during the fall months. It overlaps with a holiday, Dia de los Muertos. And so that's where residents are honoring their ancestors. Monarchs are also very important to them as well. And a lot of people have started to increase their awareness of their habitat, what their needs are, and they really want to start protecting them. And so when we promote habitat and we help to restore habitat for monarchs, we're also helping to benefit other species that may not be as likable. And I have an example on the next slide. So a lot of people are really weirded out by bats. It's just not their thing. They don't like them. And so when we are creating habitat for monarch butterflies, which habitat loss is one of the biggest issues for population decline, we're also supporting other vulnerable species that aren't as likable, like bats. And there are a lot of insect-eating bat species all over the country, and they will be utilizing similar habitat types, grassland habitat types. And if we are creating these habitats where we're increasing moths and other insect species, we're helping monarchs by creating habitat, but then we're also helping other species like bats, which is really great. So a few years ago, I think a lot of us saw on the news that the IUCN came out with a statement saying that monarch butterflies are endangered. And I think a lot of people got really confused about it. And I'd like to just kind of go over a couple of information just to kind of help people understand what it means. And so the International Union for Conservation of Nature, or the IUCN, they are an international organization. Their goals are to influence government societies to conserve nature. And so they do not have the authority to regulate federally the monarch butterfly. It's their recommendations are not the same as listing it under a federal law like the Endangered Species Act. So they aren't able to provide federal protections. However, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, they are able to decide what species are going to be listed under the Endangered Species Act. And I believe the end of this year, they will be having a final ruling decision and deciding whether or not monarchs will be listed under the Endangered Species Act. But as of right now, they're a candidate species and they are not listed federally, and there are no federal protections for monarchs. So with a lot of my research on the installation, I like to utilize citizen science. And so I have a lot of volunteers and participants that come out with me into the field and help me collect data. And I think that's really great. And it's been really useful. And I'd like to talk a little bit about some of the organizations and projects that I've been doing. The very first one is Monarch Joint Venture, which we have been partnered with since 2019, and they're actually a partner with Wild Ones as well. So this organization is a collaboration of a lot of different organizations, whether they're federal, state, nonprofits, with the main goal of protecting monarchs along their migration. And so some of the programs that they offer are research related, IMMP, citizen science, which I'll be going over in the next couple of slides. But they also provide a lot of guidance, habitat management. If you're looking to create a habitat on your property, they have a lot of different pamphlets and educational opportunities. And then they have a partnership portal where the partners within the organization are able to network with each other and access information. And it's just a really great resource to have. So the Integrative Monarch Monitoring Program, also known as IMMP, this is a national program. And the main goal is to be able to monitor habitat as well as the quality of the habitat nationwide at different areas. And they offer a couple of different field activities that you could participate in. So one being milkweed and blooming plant surveys, monarch egg and larva surveys, adult monarch surveys, or tracking parasitism and monarch survival. And that's with larvae or caterpillars. It is definitely recommended that if you are interested in participating to attend their in-person or online training workshops. They have a lot of information. They go through all the protocols and make it really simplified for people. So highly recommend checking out their website if you're interested in participating. So once you've gone through the process of being trained and you're ready to select a site to do some of these surveys, you can go onto their user portal and they have an interactive map, and you're able to kind of look at a couple of the different sites that they have previously randomly set aside. So these high priority sites are randomly placed in a grid system that Monarch Joint Venture created and placed on this mapping tool. And you can look at the image on the right here. Definitely there are these grid boxes. They have all these different sites. But if you were to go online and look for your area and you don't see any of these sites that are available to you, you can also do self-selected sites. And this is mainly what I've been doing with my research. So I can go and choose sites and report them to MJV, and that's been really helpful for me. So I decided to kind of explore your area of Midcoast Maine, see what was available on their site. And they do have a couple of these grids, but unfortunately, the way that they have randomly placed them, it's along the coast, and there aren't any high priority sites within these grids. However, I did zoom into the block that is above Augusta. And so in this block, it looks like there are several high priority sites, and they're all color coded. The colors are based off of habitat type. So grassland habitat, agricultural, right of way, that's what the colors represent. So back in 2019, I decided to kind of look at this map and see if there were any high priority sites in my area on the installation. And I found at the northern part of the installation, we have a restoration site, and one of these points fell within our restoration site, which it consists of about 120 acres. There are 12 blocks. I have an image on the right there showing it. And you can see that there was a point labeled number 13. And so I decided to kind of look at the protocol, decide what activity I wanted to do, just to kind of be involved in the organization. And I placed a 100 by 100 meter square plot and decided to choose activity 1, which was milkweed and blooming plant survey. I thought this would be a really great idea since we did previously do some habitat restoration efforts. We grubbed woody species, we seeded with a native mix, we planted over 1,000 milkweed plugs in this area of the installation. So I was like, well, this could be a really great tool for me to use to kind of keep track of milkweed and other blooming plants. And so I'm like, let's start doing this and just kind of start small and go from there. And so that first activity, if we want to get a little bit more into what it was like, I was walking a transect within that square, and within that transect, I had a PVC rectangle, and I was counting the number of milkweed plants. And at every 5 meters, I'd place this little PVC square, and I would write down the blooming plant species that were in these plots. And so it took about 2 to 3 hours to do, but it was done monthly, and it was pretty easy. And I thought it was kind of great. I was getting to see what blooming plants were available, how many milkweeds were there. It was really helpful for me. So I decided in the spring of 2020 that I kind of wanted to expand this project. And I had the opportunity to add additional points, self-selected points that I chose randomly within grasslands that I've previously worked in. And so just as the only observer, I was like, well, I think I can do about 30 points. And so I put them throughout the installation in places that I thought would be great for doing adult monarch surveys, which are activity 3. And so I was able to do about 30 points. I did 75 surveys total between April and May. And the orange points on the map were the areas where I actually had monarchs within my surveys. So activity 3, it is a transect that you're walking. And as you're slowly walking this transect, you're recording the presence of monarchs and their behavior. So as I'm walking this transect, which I chose to do a 200 meter by 50 meter rectangle instead of the 100 by 100 meter block, I slowly walked this transect, and every time I saw a monarch butterfly fly through, I would write down that it flew through at whatever distance it was at, and then I would write down its behavior. And if it was feeding on a flower, I would write down what kind of flower it was feeding on. And typically it took anywhere from 25 to 30 minutes, and it was done bi-weekly. So it was actually, I got a pretty good schedule going, and I really enjoyed doing these surveys. And so I decided that for the fall season, I wanted to continue it. And I decided to add 10 more points because I was really excited about it. And I was like, well, let's see where else we could go with this. And so I selected 10 additional points to make it a total of 40. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to do this myself because during the fall, I also do a monarch tagging project. So I fortunately was able to have 12 observers volunteer for me, and it was a combination of master naturalists from the local chapter, as well as some students from the local Texas A&M campus. And we were able to go out there, and they were able to conduct all these surveys just so I can get a general sense of where the monarchs were during the fall season. And it was super helpful, and I got really excited about it. So for the next year, the spring and fall of 2023, I'm like, you know what? We're going to make it even bigger, and we're going to go everywhere, and it's going to be great. So I decided to up it from 40 points to 80 and spread them out all throughout the installation. And in the spring, I wanted to do not only the adult monarch surveys, but I wanted to look at milkweeds and specifically counting eggs and larvae. I was really interested in the spring, how many larvae were there present on in the sites on the installation. So I had 1 to 2 biologists help me collect data. And then I decided to continue that for the fall. Again, I was doing monarch tagging, so I did have some volunteers help me out, but we were able to continue the 80 points being surveyed, and it was really great. And I hope to this year do the same thing. And I don't know if I'm going to add to this or keep the 80 points and still thinking about it, but it's been really helpful for me collecting Monarch data throughout this enormous installation. So why are we participating in IMMP? There are three great reasons. Our program is really dedicated to sharing data with like-minded organizations and individuals. So that was really important that we used citizen science. Also, collecting data provides a lot of insight, especially for grassland habitat. So which grasslands are higher value grasslands than others, which are providing a lot more nectar sources or milkweeds for monarchs as they're migrating through. And this shows a lot of initiative, especially for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, as they're going to be making that final ruling decision and listing monarchs, potentially listing monarchs under the Endangered Species Act. So that was really great too, collecting the data. And then lastly, just being able to access and having all these additional resources from Monarch Joint Venture has been super helpful. The partner portal and being able to network with people and then accessing the guides and resources has been amazing. And again, as a reminder, this is also free to download and print to the public. And they have a lot of different topics on their website too. If you're looking for educational pamphlets for students or habitat management guides, plant guides, if you are looking for agricultural management practices or you need more information on nectar sources, milkweeds, there's a lot of great information. I highly recommend checking out their website. Okay, so I mentioned a tagging program in the fall. Since 2017, our program has been participating in Monarch Watch's tagging program. And Monarch Watch is a nonprofit organization. They've been around since 1992, and they're out of the University of Kansas. And so their main focus is monarch butterflies as they're migrating through during the fall months. And anybody in the general public can go online and purchase a tagging kit. And the kit comes with monarch butterfly tags, which the minimum amount that you can purchase is one sheet, and that's about 25. But you can purchase up to, I mean, every year I purchase 2,500 tags. So you can definitely purchase higher numbers. I'm doing a larger research project, but for the average person, you can try out one sheet and go from there. The kit also comes with tagging instructions as well in a data sheet. And additional information, like they usually have a tagging newsletter, which has information from the previous year, and then also numbers from the overwintering, which is also a lot of great information to provide as well. And this is super easy. You can just go online to their website and order a kit too. And it's definitely friendly to the general public. I have been doing it every year and I really enjoy participating in this project. It is really important to note that after you go through your tagging season, that you need to submit your data to the organization. And they do ask for you to submit a tag code. So each individual tag, I have an image on the right side here. It has a series of letters and numbers that each individual is going to get. It also has a couple of emails, phone numbers for the university. As monarchs are migrating through, sightings can be reported for the country, for the US, as well as internationally. In Mexico, at the end of the season, you could see volunteers could be reporting monarchs to the organization as well. So it's really important for Monarch Watch to have the name of the participant in order to know where the monarch was initially tagged, as a way to be able to potentially track their migration through as they're coming through to the overwintering grounds. And it is easy to submit. There are instructions on their website on monarchwatch.org. They do prefer an Excel spreadsheet to be uploaded, but they have a data sheet in that tagging kit as well. And since 2017, I have uploaded information for 11,178 individual monarchs, which is a very big number, and we're very proud of that number. We're a small team of people. Typically every fall, it's myself as the lead tagger, and then I have one other biologist that helps me. But I also, each fall, I hire a team of technicians, and they're able to go out there and capture all the butterflies, and without them, I wouldn't be able to tag them. So we're really proud to have that number, and yeah, it's been really great. We love this project so much. So I did mention that I'm a graduate student with my employer at the University of Illinois. And so I wanted to continue monarch butterfly research. It's a species I really have grown to love. And so some of the things that I'm interested in collecting, which I have collected, include weight, forewing and hindwing measurements, wing condition scores, and vegetation sampling. So the project that I have been doing, I did it over the 2021 and 2022 field season. So in order to identify male versus female, the best way to do it is to look at the insides of their hind wings. And on the left here, you can see a male, and they have black glands on the insides of their hind wings. Females do not. However, their veins are thicker than male. Males also, if you were to look at the tips of their abdomens, which their bodies are made up of their head, their thorax, and their abdomen, the very tip on males, they have like a claw, which it's called a clasper, and they're able to attach themselves to and hold on to the female while they're breeding. But I feel like the easiest way, especially for someone new to the topic, is just to look for those black glands on their hind wings. When I go to measure forewings and hindwings, in order to do this, we capture monarch butterflies using a butterfly net, and I have my technicians place them in these special paper envelopes. And that way they're able to kind of be held so that I'm able to make an accurate measurement. They're able to breathe through it. It's okay. They're not injured in any way. But in order to do the measurements for the forewing, which is indicated by the red line on the left side of the screen, I'm measuring from a specific spot on their body where the wing attaches to their body and then out to the very tip or the apex of the wing. And then for the hind wing, in the center of their wing, you can see there's like a mitten-shaped cell right in the center of it. And at the top of that, there is a white spot where it starts the blue line. And I'm going to be measuring from that white spot through that mitten-shaped cell and then out to the edge of the hind wing. When I'm scoring wing condition and wing damage, I have a scoring system where numerically I'm categorizing them. And so with wing conditions, I'm looking at their wings, observing for missing scales. And so if we think of like a fish, butterflies have scales that cover their wings, and that's where their pigmentation comes from. And so I'm looking at whether or not they're missing large or small patches of wing, how transparent are their wings, and I'm going to scale them or score them based off of this observation. When it comes to wing damage, I'm looking at each one of their wings, both forewings and both hind wings, and I'm counting the number of rips, tears, punctures that are present. And then I'm using a scoring system as well. And this is the biggest question that I usually get is how do you actually tag a monarch butterfly? And so once I have collected all of the data that I need, or once you have, written all of your data down that Monarch Watch requires you to as a participant, the tagging sheet has several tags on it, and you're going to go in order and use a toothpick to pick up the tag. And it's similar to a sticker that you would find on a piece of fruit at the grocery store. They're made specifically for this research project. So you're going to use that toothpick to pick it up off of the piece of paper and then place it on that mitten-shaped cell that's on the hind wing. And it can go on either the left or right side, as long as it's on the outside of the wing. And so you're going to use your thumb or your finger to kind of hold in place as you roll that toothpick off. And then for a few seconds, just apply some gentle pressure to make sure that adhesive sticks to the wing. And then you're able to release them. So along with all of that information, I was really interested in looking at whether or not monarch butterflies prefer certain plant species that are blooming as they're migrating through, or if they're just choosing what's most commonly around. And so in order to look at this, I have had technicians collect information at random sites that I have placed in the training areas that I've captured monarch butterflies, and they're going to place
for using it in Minnesota is it's very humid.
Teresa, please mute.
Oh, it's okay. There we go. It's okay. So I'm going to have them place that 1 by 1 meter Daubenmire frame or PVC square, and they're placing it down on the ground at these random designated sites. And they're just looking at the percent cover of blooming plant species that are within the square and writing that down. To go along with that, while we're out capturing monarch butterflies, every couple of butterflies, I have technicians, after they've captured it in the net and put it in the paper envelope, they're placing that 1 by 1 meter square on the location that they captured it. Typically, they're going to be capturing it while it's feeding on a flower. So that flower is going to be in the center of the square. And then they're going to be looking at the percent of blooming plants surrounding that flower and then writing that down. And I haven't analyzed this data yet. In the next couple of weeks, I'm planning on looking at it, but I'm really excited to see the results of it. So I'm just really excited to get started. Can't wait to see what happens. But a great resource that I have used year to year is from Journey North. They have these interactive maps where the general public can submit their observations and sightings for monarch butterflies. And this is super helpful for me as a biologist, because then I'm able to go online, look at the interactive map and see what the sightings have been in my area and decide if it's a really good time. And this is the time to go out into the field and capture and begin capturing. So they have a lot of other different maps, not just monarch butterflies. And I have a screenshot here on the right. They have hummingbirds, bald eagles, and barn swallows, gray whales, loons. So these are maps that you can go on and actively look at, and you don't have to sign in and make an account. However, if you do want to participate and put your observation in, you do have to sign in and make an account, but it's pretty simple. It's a pretty easy website to use too. So I have included a screenshot from 2023, the spring of 2023, and this is showing the US, and these are all of the adult monarch sightings that were recorded between January and July. And so they're color coded based off of the month, January being the lighter green, July, and as you get further closer to July, it's going to be darker and darker. And so you could click on any one of these dots and it'll bring up an observation. So here I zoomed into the Maine or the New England area. And again, it's the same map, monarch adult sighted for the spring of 2023. And I decided to click on one of these dots here in Maine, and it brought me to an observation that someone did back in July 21st, 2023, Winter Harbor, Maine. They were actually able to get a picture of the monarch butterfly feeding on a common milkweed, which was really cool. And they also provided an observation in the little they also provided an observation to go along with it, which is really helpful as well. But you could go on and interact and click on each one of these little green dots and read the observations. Not every one of them will have an in-depth observation or a photo to go with it. It kind of depends on the individual that submitted it. But it's really nice to see a photo if you were able to get one and a really in-depth observation, because that provides information for me when I go to look at it too. And I'm sure a lot of other people like reading your observations as well. And this is a really fun way to look at data collection. So I wanted to talk a little bit about host plants, and I decided to include a few of the native milkweeds that you would see in your area of Maine. So host plants, these are the plants that monarch caterpillars are going to be feeding on mainly. And adult monarch butterflies, the females, are going to be seeking these out. So these are great additions to your garden if you want to promote monarch butterflies. But a lot of other pollinator species feed from the flowers as well. But we have common milkweed, swamp milkweed, poke milkweed, and butterfly weed. So if you're looking to have native milkweeds in your gardens, these are great options. And of course, some of them, they may have different habitat types that they prefer. Swamp milkweed, they definitely like wetter habitats than maybe common milkweed or butterfly weed, but you can definitely research that. And they're really great to have in your garden if you want to attract monarch butterflies. I do want to talk a little bit about tropical milkweed. I think it's really important for people to be aware of the potential problems that are associated with this species, even if they're not in the more temperate, warmer regions of the country. So let's get into it. So tropical milkweed is a non-native species of milkweed. They are native to Mexico and Central America, non-native to our region in Maine. So some of the potential problems that you can see is that this plant won't die back in the warmer regions. They can continuously bloom. And that can influence monarch butterflies to breed instead of migrate. And there is a parasitic protozoan called Ophriocistis electroscura. The acronym is OE. A lot of people go by OE. And they have evolved with monarch butterflies. They have been found back in the 60s, I believe they were found in Florida. Florida has a non-migratory population. The spore load is a little higher in Florida than it is in other parts of the country. But tropical milkweed can negatively impact monarch health, and because it continuously blooms. And so this is a plant that's been very controversial in the community, especially with the negative impacts. And with higher OE parasite loads, monarch butterflies can experience some health impacts. So OE is consumed by caterpillars and it lays dormant in the digestive tract until they go into that chrysalis or pupa stage, and then it becomes activated and it multiplies. And then when they emerge as an adult, it's dormant on the outsides of their bodies again. And so females that are heavily loaded with spores can pass that on to caterpillars. Individuals that are mating can interact and pass spores. They can also leave them on the flowers and leaves of plants like milkweeds as well. And so individuals that have parasite infections, they can experience issues with their energy. So caterpillars might not be able to emerge from their chrysalises, or and if adult emerges, you might have observed monarchs that have crinkly wings, or the tips of their wings have curled a little bit, making it a little difficult to fly. And sometimes it can impact the adult energy level. So, you know, if you're a butterfly that's in Canada and you have to make a 3,000-mile journey back to Mexico, and, you know, you might not have the energy level to make the entire trip. And so it's important to kind of understand what some of the negative impacts are of this plant, and why we should choose native plants instead. But it is important to know that this isn't a bad plant. It provides vital food in its native range, and it has been providing food for the non-migratory population in Florida as well. It is recommended that in Maine, we do cut the stems back to the ground in mid to late September. So if you do have this plant in your garden, it's okay. You can cut the stems back right when the monarchs are ready to migrate out of the state. And so this will help prevent that delay in migration. So you don't have to worry about going out to your yards and pulling everything. I mean, if that's the kind of person that, if that's what you want to do, and that's kind of like, you know, something that is intriguing and you'd like to do that, then go for it and then replace it with natives. But you can also prune them, and that'll be okay as well. So I think this is a great learning opportunity, especially for people who are new to the topic. This is a couple of photos that I took from a big box store last year or the year before. I went in and found this plant being advertised as a native plant species called butterfly weed, and I circled the common name there at the top. And the label does have an image of the plant as well. And I included an image of butterfly weed, which is what it's being advertised at, and that's at the bottom right. You can kind of tell it looks very similar to what's being advertised on the label here. However, the label doesn't include the species of the plant, the scientific name. It includes the genus. So a scientific name, it involves two words, the genus and the species. And a lot of milkweed plants have the same genus, Asclepius, but it doesn't show the species name. So we're kind of going based off of the common name, which is showing butterfly weed. There's also an image. So it's like, oh, well, looks like butterfly weed, the native milkweed. There is also a sticker at the very bottom saying, please note, wait 2 weeks prior to exposure to caterpillars, and then heavily prune milkweed stems 6 to 10 inches by Halloween. And I found this kind of confusing, especially if I was coming from the mindset of someone who doesn't have the knowledge of tropical milkweed or native milkweeds, because it shows that it's a native milkweed, but it's kind of giving the information that you would to someone who has tropical milkweed. And the image of tropical milkweed at the top is actually one from the plant that I took. So In this case, it was being marketed as a native plant, but it was actually non-native tropical milkweed. So great example of knowing what you're purchasing when you're going to plant stores, knowing the scientific name, looking up the plants, knowing what they look like. Great example. Okay, so to end the presentation, I'd like to go over a couple of different tips that you can do to help support native pollinators. One being planting a diverse collection of native host and nectar plants for both juvenile and adult pollinators. This is really important, providing food for not only the juvenile stages, like the monarch caterpillars, but then also providing blooming plant species for other stages, growing stages, is really important. And by diversifying your gardens, you can use a combination of different grasses, blooming plant species, shrubs, and trees. There are a lot of different pollinators, especially butterflies. They're using a lot of different types of plants. There are some butterflies where their host plants are grasses, others trees. So it's a great way to up the diversity of pollinators in your little native pollinator garden or your habitat that you're creating. And a goal that I have, especially being in Texas, we do have warmer winter months. So we do have a few species that bloom throughout the winter months here. I like to be able to have plants that are blooming throughout the year. So spring, summer, fall, winter, we're able to see something blooming so that pollinators get something for each season. But in Maine, you could substitute for the winter. We're not really going to be seeing a lot of things blooming. But you could substitute fruiting trees and shrubs during the winter months, and that's providing food for bird species. And like I talked about earlier in the earlier slides, fruits, these fruits have seeds in them as well. It's a part of the pollination process by dispersing the seeds. So another great way to add color throughout the year, especially in those cold winter months. It's important to understand the differences between wild native plants and cultivated varieties. So a cultivated variety, these are plants that are selectively bred for specific traits. This could be bloom time, they're blooming longer, or they have different flower colors, flower shapes, or they're more mounding plants versus taller plants. And so some of the problems we can run into with cultivars are crossbreeding with native plant populations. And this can create these little isolated pockets and eventually extinction. And that's a huge problem. Also, when we're hybridizing and cultivating these different varieties of plants, we're changing their genetics. And so we're potentially impacting the quality of nectar they're producing. And that could mean less food for pollinators. And I have a picture that I took from when I went out, and this is a great example of an echinacea or a coneflower. And the way you can tell that it's a cultivated variety is by the quoted Cheyenne spirit. It says echinacea as the genus, Cheyenne spirit. This is a cultivated variety. Now, I do have a personal experience that I like to share. We have a small pollinator garden. It's about 1.5 acres right outside of our office footprint on the installation. And we have a native aster called aromatic aster, or fall aster is the common name. I have a scientific name up there. And we unknowingly purchased a couple of plants that happened to be cultivars, and we didn't know at the time. And so we planted them. We did have some wild plants that we have collected seeds from and germinated and put them in our garden as well. So we were able to kind of see, the two next to each other. And after a couple of growing seasons, we noticed that the wild variety and the cultivated were definitely very different. The cultivated were very short to the ground, low mounding, and they had these bright purple blooms, and it was so eye-catching. Like everybody would go straight to them. But I noticed that a lot of pollinator species weren't utilizing the plant. I feel like it was attracting humans and not the pollinators. And so a couple of fall seasons, I went out and observed that the monarchs migrating through, which sometimes we'd have 25 to 30 individuals, they were going straight to the wild shrubs and not the cultivated varieties. So it led me to think that it was cultivated. There's something genetically altered where potentially, and I don't know this for sure, but potentially maybe the quality of nectar is not great. And so bees and monarchs are not going to it, and they prefer the wild as it has a higher quality or a better source of nectar and food. So definitely a great personal experience to use as an example. A lot of comments and questions that I get with this topic is, how do I start this? This is super overwhelming. There's a lot of information. And do I really have to get rid of all of my non-native plants? And so to help a lot of people through this, I kind of have a couple of tips to kind of get you started. And the first thing I recommend is just researching what native plants you have in your region. You could purchase hard copy books or soft copy books. There's a lot of online resources. You can go to a native plant society or your local wild ones chapter and talk with a couple of experts about, hey, what plants are in our region? What should we be expecting? What can we grow? And just kind of research them, get to kind of know what's in your area. And then you can go out into your yard and assess it. Just, look to see what areas are full sunlight, what areas are full shade. You can actually look at the different soil types that you have. And I'm pretty sure the University of Maine has a soil testing program where you can mail out your samples if you really wanted to. But you can also look at the available space that you have and get really creative with it too. There are a lot of different flower shapes. We went over flower shapes and what kind of pollinators they attract. So you can definitely just kind of get into it, and it's not something you have to jump right into it and have it consume your life, but you can gradually just kind of like get to know what plants are in your area and figure out what you'd like to attract. And start off really small too. You can purchase 1 or 2 native plants to go along with your non-natives and grow your collection. And there are some people that have told me, they're like, you know what, I really just don't want to get rid of my non-natives. And that's okay too, but you can also start supplementing with native plants. So keep your non-natives, but make sure that you're supplementing with native plants. You're planting them around and you're providing food and resources for your local pollinator population. So I did a little bit of research for this presentation, and a great resource that I found was the Wild Seed Project, which I believe they're out of North Yarmouth. And it looks like they have a lot of great seeds that you can purchase online if you are interested in germinating your own native seeds. And they also have a blog with a lot of information as well. So I highly recommend going on their website and just kind of perusing through what they have for options for seeds, and maybe search their blog and look up a couple of little tidbits of information. And they have a lot of great plants available as well. And it looks like it would be a great resource. All right, number 2, providing a water source for pollinators. And I would highly consider people to start adding shallow dishes. You can use ceramic saucers that you would get, from your big name box store, or, you could even thrift them as well. And you can use them in your little native pollinator habitats. These are a couple of pictures from our tiny little native garden that we have in our front yard. But the birds absolutely love it. And we do place rocks in these little saucers to make sure that the birds and they know how deep the water is. But also it gives access for bees to land and drink from the rock. And so it's really important to remember that if you're going to be supplying water in dishes or in a bird bath, to frequently clean them to stop the spread of disease. So butterflies also do this behavior called mud puddling, and you may notice it around moist areas of soil, roadkill, also feces. If you have like a ranch or a pasture or horses, you might see butterflies doing this behavior as well. And they are consuming nutrients that they wouldn't get from nectar from flowers. And so they're using their proboscis, their tongues, they're sucking up vitamins, minerals, salts, amino acids, and you can create areas of your yard too that replicate this as well. So 3, providing shelter for hibernating pollinators. And so as temperatures cool, insects are going to be looking for a place to get all cozy and warm for those winter months. And so it's a great way to provide shelter. Having brush piles, leaves, soil, rocks, logs, keeping dead flower stalks in your gardens, also really great. During the fall, it would be great to leave the leaves. You know, a lot of people have been talking about leaving the leaves, and I have had a few people actually talk to me about how it's a little bit more difficult when they are living in an HOA area. And so if you do find yourself struggling and told that you have to keep it on the cleaner, more pristine side, if you can, try to have a designated spot that's out of sight in your backyard, and you can make just a tiny little overwintering area for pollinators, and that way you're not getting in trouble. You still have this little area, but you're following the rules. So here are some examples of different things you'll see in different shelter types. We have piles of leaves. You're going to be finding queen bumblebees and fireflies. Butterfly and moth larvae also use this as well. So by leaving the leaves, you're providing habitat for all these different types of pollinators. 70% of native bee species are ground nesting. And so if you do notice that you have these little small like entrances to an underground beehive, it's really important to be able to flag off that area. You can kind of keep them safe and overwinter there, or, you know, prevent tilling from gardens or anything. You can definitely flag it off. That'd be really great. I'm sure they would appreciate that. Dead flower stalks, great for cavity nesting insects. So they're going to be seeking out these flower stalks that are hollow and kind of going in there and staying warm for the winter months. Logs and rocks, there are a lot of different crevices for caterpillars, beetles, and other pollinators to access safe places to overwinter. So it's really important that we try to reduce our use of pesticides, herbicides, insecticides, a lot of chemicals. They are easily accessible at a lot of stores, and they kill a lot of different insects, not just the ones that you're trying to aim for, or the species that you deem as a pest. And so I think it's really important for us to kind of reassess the term or the phrase, what is a weed, and kind of change our mindsets. So we deem a weed as an undesirable plant that's just growing in an area that we don't want them to grow in. So think of a lot of mowed yards when we have dandelions or some other flowers that pop up, and we just don't want them to pop up there, and we're going to cut them back and mow them or spray them with an herbicide. And so there are a couple of great examples, especially milkweeds. They have weed in the common name. So I've had a lot of people say, oh, wait a minute, milkweed is actually really good, but it has weed in the name. I didn't know that. And they do produce a toxic milky sap. But however, they're not a noxious weed. They're actually very beneficial, as we've been learning, for monarch butterflies. But this applies to a lot of other plant species as well. They are deemed a weed, but they are very beneficial to a lot of other insect or wildlife populations. So I think that we need to reassess what we think when it comes to plants in our yard. And so this is another big one for especially newbies to understand, is that you really want insects to be eating the plants that you're planting. And so I understand you go out and you're spending money to get all these native plants, and you're spending time to plant them, and you get really excited. And I think we get stuck in this mentality that everything needs to be neat and precise and clean. However, you want insects to be consuming the plants that you're planting. You're creating a buffet. By creating a native garden, you're creating a safe space for insects and pollinators to consume food and to survive. And so I know it can be disheartening to see holes being munched in your leaves, or a plant's, munched down to the stem, but you're actually doing the right thing, and you should expect to see leaf damage. That's actually a really good sign. You want there to be leaf damage from beneficial pollinators. And the Xerces Society has this quick, simple steps for buying pollinator safe plants. They advertise it as bee safe, but these can also apply to a lot of different pollinators as well. And so a goal could be seeking out plants and seeds that are certified organic. And that would be, they're not grown with a lot of insecticides, neonicotinoids, really important. And then you could even go a step further, going to your local plant nurseries, and you start opening up conversation. You're asking them, what are the steps that you take for pest management? How are you controlling pest species? What are your, what are the different things that you like to do? And by showing that you're engaging with business owners that you're interested in these topics, you're showing that this is something that they should also be interested in as well. So very important to start opening up that conversation. And lastly, mowed lawns are monocultures. They are not very beneficial. They're not diverse. They don't provide a lot of food sources for pollinators. You really want to shoot for diversity. You want to shoot for places that provide shelter, food, water, all the different things that we've talked about previously. Having multiple native plants that provide food and are very beneficial for pollinators. The image on the right is actually my backyard. And it's under a lot of oak trees, which doesn't grow grass, but when we first moved in, we saw a lot of opportunity. And I know it's full shaded, so we did have to do a little bit of research about, what plants that are blooming plants can, bloom in shade, and it is doable to have a shade blooming pollinator garden. And we just looked into it. We got really into, looking at the different flowering species and what they require, and made sure to keep the leaves, sticks, logs. We try to provide a lot of different shelter habitats for them and food for pollinators. And we really kind of got into it and was really excited. Even though it's a shaded backyard, we were still able to kind of make it this really great, safe place for pollinators. And we're kind of proud of it. We really like it. And lastly, I think it's important for everybody to understand that you don't have to be a biologist to support pollinators and make a difference, that everybody has the power to help pollinators. And if we all designated just a small area of our gardens or of our apartment terraces as pollinator-friendly habitat, and that could be, you have a farm and you have a couple of pastures that you really want to dedicate terra pots with a couple of native plants, and that's perfectly fine. And so if we all step up and create these little tiny tidbits of habitat, we can add millions of acres for vulnerable species. And you don't even have to do every single thing that I've talked about tonight. I've thrown a lot of information at you. There's the citizen science projects and, shelter, food and water and educating others and reducing chemicals. A lot of information. You can start by just picking small little things here and there. Just pick one thing and turn it into a habit or a routine, whether that's just like telling people, hey, I saw this presentation and it was really great and you should watch it. You should look at habitat, or even go to local areas talking about, hey, I want to look into native plants. What should I do? And so it's important for us to realize that this professional biologist, you can do some research yourself and find these resources and guides, and you can make a difference in your backyard. Here I have a couple of references for images and information. And that is the end of the presentation. And I would love to answer any questions if we have time and if we have any questions.